Some of the coolest Transformers were completely erased before you ever saw them, and they could have changed the entire plot. One of them was supposed to replace Optimus Prime. You will never guess who it was. 1. Transit, the Decepticon who never made it past opening scene. Transit was supposed to be the very first threat audiences saw in Transformers, Rise of the Beasts. And honestly, it would have changed the entire tone of the movie from the first minute. He wasn't just another random Decepticon. He was huge, quiet, and hiding in plain sight as a city bus, which already makes him feel creepy in a realistic way. The original opening had Optimus Prime hunting him down in a brutal fight that felt more like a warning than an action scene. It showed Optimus as angry and aggressive, not the calm leader people are used to. But that was exactly the problem. The scene felt too dark, too serious, too early. The filmmakers wanted a more balanced tone, something that didn't hit the audience with heavy violence right away. So Transit was completely removed, not trimmed, not reduced, just gone. 2. The Fallen's original army, more than just one villain. When Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen was still in development, the story was much bigger than what we got in the final version. Instead of just one ancient villain, the idea was to introduce an entire group of corrupted primes. Not just the Fallen, but multiple beings like him. Each one powerful, each one ancient, each one representing a darker side of Cybertron's history. That concept could have completely change the scale of the movie. It would not just be Autobots versus Decepticons anymore. It would feel like a war between generations of gods. The mythology of Transformers would have expanded in a huge way, giving more depth to the origin of the Primes and their fall from power. But in the end, reality stepped in. Budget limits and runtime concerns forced the writers to scale everything down. Managing multiple villains like that would have made the story too complex and expensive. So the idea was simplified into one main threat. 3. Ultra Magnus, the leader who never arrived. There's a certain kind of character that fans always expect to see, and Ultra Magnus is one of them. From the early days of the Bayverse, there were talks about bringing him into the movies. Not just as another Autobot, but as someone important, someone who could actually stand beside or even replace Optimus Prime at some point. In Transformers lore, Ultra Magnus is known as a disciplined and serious commander. He follows rules. He leads with structure. And that makes him very different from Optimus, who often leads with instinct and emotion. That contrast alone could have created some really strong moments on screen. At one stage, writers even considered adding him into Transformers: Dark of the Moon. But the problem was simple. There were already too many characters. The story was packed, and adding another major Autobot would only make it harder to give everyone enough attention. 4. Devcon, the bounty hunter with a broken story. If you remember Transformers: Dark of the Moon, you might vaguely recall a strange, almost creature-like Transformer swinging through buildings. That was Devcon, and what we saw on screen was only a small piece of what he was supposed to be. Originally, Devcon had a full story behind him. He wasn't meant to be clearly good or evil. He was a bounty hunter, someone who worked for whoever paid him. That alone would have added a new layer to the conflict. Not everything would be black and white anymore. There would be characters living in the middle, making choices based on survival rather than loyalty. He also had more action scenes planned. Moments that would show how he fights, how he thinks, and how dangerous he really is. But most of that was cut during editing. What remained was just a few seconds of screen time, without any real explanation. 5. The Twins' extended role, from comic relief to story arc. Skids and Mudflap, better known as the Twins, were supposed to be more than just comic relief in Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. Early versions of the script actually gave them a proper arc. They would start off goofy and immature, but slowly grow into braver, more capable fighters. That kind of development could have made them surprisingly likable. Watching characters change always makes a story feel more real. And for a film filled with action, having that emotional growth would have added some balance. But things didn't go as planned. The characters received heavy backlash after early reactions. Many people didn't like how they were portrayed. Because of that, the studio made the decision to cut down their roles significantly. Scenes were removed. Dialogue was shortened. Their development was almost completely erased. 6. Megatron's alternate return, a different resurrection. When Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen was being developed, Megatron was supposed to return in a much more powerful and mysterious way. The original idea wasn't just a quick revival. It was something deeper, something ritualistic. The scene was meant to feel ancient, almost like a dark ceremony tied directly to Cybertronian history. It would have shown how Megatron's connection to the Primes was not just political, but almost spiritual in a twisted way. This version could have added a lot more depth to his character. Instead of just coming back as a villain, he would feel like part of something bigger, something older than the war itself. It would also help explain why he followed the Fallen so closely. But in the final movie, all of that was simplified. 7. Shockwave's cut dominance. The villain who should have led. Before Transformers. Dark of the Moon was released, Shockwave was heavily promoted as the main threat. Everything about him looked dangerous. The design, the presence, even the way he moved. It felt like he was going to lead the Decepticons in a completely new way. And that was actually the plan at one point. Shockwave was meant to be more than just a fighter. He was supposed to be intelligent, strategic, and in control. A leader who thinks before he acts. That alone would have made him very different from Megatron. There were scenes planned that showed him commanding forces, making decisions, and shaping the battle from the shadows. 8. Arcee's team. The female Autobots who disappeared. In Transformers. Revenge of the Fallen, we were briefly introduced to a trio of female Autobots, Arcee, Chromia, and Elita 1. On paper, this was a great idea. It added variety. It brought new energy. And it opened the door for different kinds of teamwork and fighting styles. Early scripts actually planned to give them more time on screen, more dialogue, more personality. They were supposed to feel like a real unit, working together in a way that stood out from the rest of the Autobots. That kind of focus could have made them memorable very quickly. But in the final version, almost all of that was gone. Their appearances were reduced to short action moments with barely any lines. They show up, fight, and disappear without leaving much of an impression. 9. Dino/Mirage's true personality, lost in translation. In Transformers. Dark of the Moon, the sleek Ferrari Autobot was introduced as Dino, but fans know him better as Mirage. And while his design was stylish and memorable, his personality didn't fully come through the way it was originally planned. Early versions of the character leaned heavily into a more distinct identity. He was meant to be smooth, confident, and tactical. The kind of character who moves with purpose and speaks with style. Even his Italian influence was supposed to be stronger, giving him a unique voice compared to the rest of the Autobots. However, a lot of that was toned down in the final cut. Several scenes that helped build his character were removed. What remained was mostly action, with very little depth behind it. 10. Sentinel Prime's alternate motivation. A different betrayal. Sentinel Prime is one of the most important figures in Transformers, Dark of the Moon, and his betrayal is a major turning point. But early drafts of the story painted him in a very different light. He wasn't meant to be a straightforward villain. Instead, he was written as a leader making a difficult choice. The idea was to make his actions feel more conflicted, less about evil and more about survival. He believed he was saving Cybertron, even if it meant hurting others. That kind of motivation would have added a lot more emotional weight, especially in his relationship with Optimus Prime. It would feel less like betrayal and more like tragedy. In the final version, that complexity was reduced. Sentinel became a clearer antagonist, easier to understand but less layered. Some of the dialogue hints at that deeper version, but it's never fully explored. 11. The Wreckers' expanded role. From chaos to character. The Wreckers were introduced in Transformers, Dark of the Moon as a wild and loud trio. Roadbuster, Topspin, and Leadfoot brought a very different kind of energy to the Autobots. Their NASCAR designs made them stand out instantly. Originally, they were supposed to be more than just chaotic fighters. The plan was to give them stronger personalities, more dialogue, and a clearer sense of teamwork. They were meant to feel like a tight unit that works together in smart and creative ways, not just loud, but effective. But as the movie was edited down, a lot of that depth was removed. Most of their scenes focus on action, with very little time spent on who they are as characters. They still have presence, but it feels incomplete. 12. Unicron Tease, the planet that almost was. One of the biggest ideas that almost changed everything in the Transformers movies revolves around Unicron. Early concepts in the Bayverse hinted at something massive. The idea that Earth itself could actually be Unicron in disguise, a sleeping entity waiting to awaken. This concept would have taken the story to a completely different level. It wouldn't just be about robots fighting on Earth. It would mean the planet itself is part of the conflict. Something ancient, powerful, and far beyond anything the Autobots or Decepticons had faced before. But at the time, those ideas were kept very subtle, or removed entirely. The story stayed more grounded, focusing on the immediate conflict instead of expanding into something that big. Later, Transformers. The Last Knight brought this idea back more clearly, but by then, it felt a bit disconnected from earlier hints.